Hello again, and welcome back to Eat with Sandhya. We are on day 3, and I have to say that I realize there's a little problem with what I'm doing because every time I come here and I'm trying to speak, my mouth is always watering. I already said that I get very, very excited with food, and while I did have a very unhealthy relationship with it, and emotional eating is something that we will discuss tomorrow. I will say that I'm still very, very excited, I think in a healthy kind of way, by it. So you'll have to excuse like my constantly watering mouth. It's a Pavlovian response. Drool, drool when it's 1:30, time for lunch. Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining me back again today. Yesterday, I was supposed to spend a little bit more time discussing macros and micros, but we talked also about gratitude and being fully aware when we eat. Long story short about the macros, they are proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Okay, these being the essential building blocks of our body. Think about it. Everything that you consume makes you. There's nothing else that can come in. Nobody's pumping anything in or sending anything in by IV to constitute this body. So we ought to perhaps be a little careful about what exactly we're putting in through here, and eventually that's going to sit here and everywhere, and of course in all of our fat deposits and all the other bits that we're not so happy about and tend to judge ourselves so cruelly on as well. Of the 3 macros, I just wanted to add what I missed yesterday was that, strictly speaking, carbohydrates are the one macros that our body can survive without. And that's what a lot of the sort of diets have capitalized on. The keto is all protein and fat and no carbohydrate, in the hope that our body will go into ketosis. It's something that we can't actually track, and very often what we think, we don't actually go into a state of ketosis. We're just eating a lot of fat and protein. But we do know how important carbohydrates are for several other reasons, for the kind of energy it releases, for the satiety value around food, for the kind of nutrients that are carried through carbohydrates. You know what? This is stuff that's easy to look up on, but I will say that please ask yourself, when it comes to any sort of miracle cure or like the next big thing, please ask yourself a couple of questions. If you can research on it, like I'd spoken about yesterday, please do that. If you don't have the time, and very often be aware that we are being marketed to. So ask yourself, rule of thumb, who makes money out of something like this? Who stands to benefit from this? All right. And also ask yourself, is this something that I can sustain? How does this fit into my lifestyle? Is this going to alienate me from like being able to have a meal with my family, or to be able to go out to a restaurant and enjoy myself? Usually if it's very, very restrictive, it does come at a cost. So my golden rule always has been that you have the choice. I'll add to that for every choice we make, there is a price to pay. There is a consequence. There is a cost to bear. Please ask yourself if you truly understand that cost, on the one hand, and 2, if you're prepared to actually pay that cost. So these can be some rule of thumbs that you can use before you adopt any kind of specialized eating plan. But what I have been promising you over these 10 days is getting down to the basics and the first principles of eating, right? So very important to note, besides the macros, the lesser known aspect of nutrition is the micronutrients. Now, I'd love to say that, there are miracle products like Soylent that have put together food in exactly the concentrations and the nutrient profile that our body needs, but we know but none of this has actually stood up to very rigid experimentation. I said that there's a lot that we don't understand about food itself, how it reacts with each of our bodies, and so many other environmental factors that come into play. So while you may have heard things like, the protein in plant proteins is not very bioavailable, and therefore you need to supplement it with certain other kinds of protein, simple acts like rajma, for example, the minute you eat rajma with rice, several things happen to it. The protein itself becomes more bioavailable, the GI index goes down, if I'm not mistaken. Again, words like GI, low glycemic index of food, hardcore calorie counting, they're not as rigorous as they're made out to be by sensationalized news or by hashtag influencers. It's quite, and a lot of these tests that were conducted, keep in mind, were conducted under very restrictive circumstances, in laboratory conditions perhaps, many of them conducted on labs, and the results extrapolated to us, to human beings, under very specialized conditions. So what do we then follow as rule of thumb? Was the plate composition that I talked about. You would like to get as wide a variety of food as possible. If you're eating, think about it this way. If you're eating the same 4 or 5 vegetables or the same 2 grains, how can you possibly get a wide range of nutrients that we don't truly understand, but we know that our body is much better for them? So rule of thumb is, one, a calorie deficit will cause your body to start burning its own fat and eventually its own muscle, but that comes a lot later. Calorie surplus, it has to go somewhere. It's not going to evaporate miraculously, so your body is going to bear the brunt of it. It's important to get in a wide variety of your macros and micros, which comes from eating the rainbow, as it's called. Now, what foods do we eat? And are there superfoods? Are there miracle foods that are going to be like the elixir of good health? Eat raw onions today, eat chia seeds tomorrow, eat acai berry, avocado, coconut sugar is the miracle, honey is a miracle cure. Superfood is a marketing term, as I alluded to in the first session. All that we know really for sure is that we need to eat a variety of food. Okay, so there's no one food, even the miraculous turmeric, as it's called. Try eating just turmeric for a week and let's see how your body does on that. It's not going to fare well at all. So what we want to focus on, one of the easy rules of thumb, another one of my favorite quotes, is by a food researcher and scientist and writer called Michael Pollan. He sums it up as: eat whole foods, not a lot, mostly plants. Now, I'm not advocating an all vegetarian or all vegan diet at all. I'm just saying that we know, as pretty strongly evidence-based, that the more whole foods is the opposite of which is processed foods, right? And I'll show you now how you can recognize this. Not a lot, okay? We are eating way too much of particular kinds of foods and nothing in the past. So again, since I've been promising to show you my food every day, let me show you my lunch for today. It is, okay, so there's a different kind of dal here. This is Bengal gram with also some green leafy vegetables, but you can't see because it's cooked into it. I mentioned that I don't like eating a lot of salads, so I've dressed up my salad with a mixture of seeds. Now, keep in mind that seeds are like the storehouse of power and energy. So they are pretty high in calorie and they're also dehydrated foods. But because I eat plant-based and because I'm not on a calorie deficit diet, and you see I've barely used like half a teaspoon of seeds, it's adding a little bit of crunch. There's no other flavor to it. I will use a salad dressing, but this is made at home. And I'll tell you why. There's no great glory to, oh, this is home cooked. It's just that you kind of know what ingredients go into it, and there are unlikely to be a lot of preservatives that are not going to work very well for us. Here we have cabbage and peas, literally just tempered in turmeric, very little salt and green chili and curry leaves. And my roti today, I knew I should have asked Manju Didi before our session, but apologies, I was with a client. I'm going to say this is bajra, a millet, also possibly mixed with a little bit of rice, because I know that we do that sometimes in our house as well. So this was going to be my plate for today. Now, how are we going to all of this? How do I know that this is whole foods? One, it hasn't gone through, you can actually recognize it as once being a living thing, right? That's an easy way to recognize it as whole food, except possibly the roti, right? So for cereals, it's the one place where it is okay for it to go through some amount of processing. Again, raw versus cooked. I know that there are a lot of people that swear by a raw diet. There's no evidence that it is anyway greatly superior. We do know that cooking foods does in many cases kill some of the some of the nutrient value of food, but not all. In some cases, it does make it more bioavailable, makes it more digestive, makes some foods actually edible from being somewhat poisonous before to start off with. But the rule of thumb is like you don't want to cook any kind of food to death, right? That pretty much ensures that much of its nutritive value is destroyed, because many of these just the bonds, the molecules that make up the vitamins or the protein even will get denatured or will get destroyed as a result of a lot of heat and a lot of cooking. So rule of thumb, you want to eat, take your preference, whether it's lightly cooked. We also said that we want oils to be minimal, so see whether it's doused in oil or not. That's also going to leach out a lot of the nutrition value. Now, how are you going to recognize whole food? Two ways. One is that, see, when you look at a particular food, if you can more or less figure out what's in it. I hadn't checked what was being cooked today, but I do know, for example, I can actually recognize the dal that is being used here, because I can actually see some of the whole grains of dal. I can see the green leafy vegetable that's been used there. I can see the bits of tomato. So you know largely what actually is constituted into this food. I'm now going to do like a bit of a pop quiz for you today for some foods, and maybe if you can tell me, perhaps on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like totally processed, and 1 being like completely raw and whole, or maybe 1 being like really healthy food and the other being like not so sure about that, how you feel about these kind of things. Okay, let's start with a tough one actually. I've got here cranberries. All right, now, should we be eating cranberries or not? Are they the miracle food that they're made out to be? I've also got dried prunes. A lot of this gets gifted to me, and somewhere I have dried blueberries that have come to me all the way from California. Okay. So dried fruit is a bit of a double-edged sword. Keep in mind that any kind of, absolutely right on the 8 there, I would have rated it the same, which is that it's not that it's bad in itself. So it's fruit that's been dehydrated. So imagine if I had to eat like a handful of cranberries versus cranberries that have been fully constituted with their moisture. Keep in mind that a lot of fruit has upwards of 80 or 90% moisture in it. There's no, that amount of cranberries reconstituted would have made like this much of cranberries, which fruit also contains sugar. All right. Now, when you dehydrate it, it's going to look very small. It's not going to fill you up very much, and you'll continue eating, but you've also had a massive calorific and a sugar load. Now, and absolutely right, if processed with a preservative. Another thing to do is to look at the ingredients at the back of a packet and see what all there is. If it's just the dried fruit, you're still better off. And I sometimes do use these when I'm traveling and I have no access to fresh fruit. I would rather eat simply dehydrated food, but small quantities of it. Similar for like muesli and stuff. Today there are a lot of like breakfast foods that are not as processed, like the famous big brand foods. Like, you'll be hard pressed to even know what went into them, and they have a lot of sugar and they're highly processed. Something like this is still processed, because I can see the grain, I can see the dry fruit, I can see the nuts in it, high calorie foods, dehydrated, and I know that a small quantity of this is actually enough for the nutritive value that it's going to bring, but it's not going to fill me up very much, right? I'd probably very likely feel very hungry. I'm also probably going to eat this with fresh fruit, plus, and I'll still feel hungry by 11 o'clock. So small quantities, these are always like a distant second to eating fresh, whole foods. So how do we feel about ketchup? Can you recognize what went into it? If you think it's just tomatoes, well, yes and no. Yes, but very likely the top ingredients will be sugar, salt, preservatives. So when I'm not going to demonize processed foods, I will just say, don't think of them as your food. Think of them as like a condiment or a what's the word, a dressing, or simply a garnish on your food. All right. So if you must eat like baked potatoes or even fried potatoes, is potato a demon? It is a vegetable, or technically a fruit, I think. But it is simply vegetable. Where it acquires its demon-like qualities is because it's deep fried and very often in hydrogenated oils and things like that. But otherwise, potato is just a vegetable. You can eat a potato. Banana is another fruit that's demonized as like, oh my god, high calorie, whatever. I will ask you, which do you think has more calories, a biscuit or a banana, right? Technically, I don't know this particular brand of biscuit, but look at what actually a biscuit does. Will anything in nature be able to pack calories into this tiny bit of real estate as a factory can? Highly unlikely. Okay, and everything in this tiny bit of real estate, I'll quote my former colleague and dear friend Patrick Reynolds, who said that think of this as like a chip on your phone or in a supercomputer. We have packed all that amount of data into this tiny real estate. We have packed all those calories, all of these artificial flavoring. There is a lot of science that goes behind the flavoring on these hyper flavored biscuits and snacks and biscuits and jams and juices. Is it going to hit the bliss point? It's called the bliss point of food. Is it going to make you feel like, in fact, one of the taglines is no one can eat just one, right? It has to be such that you finish one and you're salivating again for the next one. So who's making money out of this is a question you need to ask yourself. So I made a salad dressing at home. This has literally like 3 or 4 ingredients. I made hummus at home. It's over because I was hungry yesterday evening. These are some of the snacks that I do have. I've made like a chili oil at home, which is, again, I'll use small quantities of this. Our greed and our palates have gotten so desensitized over the years that we'll eat like, tablespoons full of it, and then it takes, because it's again dehydrated and fat heavy and salt heavy, it's going to make us want to eat more and more, dopamine hit, but it's actually going to do very little for us, and it's going to be very, very difficult for us to work it off. Same goes for jams. We are concentrating the fruit. We are cooking it with a lot of sugar, and sometimes there are preservatives as well. If you want the taste of sweet, you can put it just a few drops on the top of something that you're eating. It will hit your palate, give you that ping of pleasure, and then after that it becomes the law of diminishing marginal utility. I know our time is up, but I just wanted to save my dinner from last night for you. When you do crave something, like we were craving pasta last night, what we did here was that you cook the pasta, so you see the volume of the pasta, and then what we did was we added equal, if not more, volume of vegetables, and this is cooked in a pure tomato sauce with just a few fresh herbs in them. I don't add cheese, but if you are going to add cheese, it literally, again, just needs to be on the top to hit your palate, to give you that little bit of opioid hit. Yes, cheese does have like flavors that mimic opioids in our brain, and that's why we crave it so much, and no one can eat just one and whatnot. So that was my lesson for today, for what to eat, what not to eat. I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I'm saying just be careful. Don't think of it as food. Think of it as a dressing. Think of it as garnish for all of the things that come out of a bottle or a box, and that goes for packaged juices as well. If you had to actually eat, this is pomegranate, if you had to eat this much of pomegranate with all of the fiber and with all of the chewing, you would be exhausted, trust me. But here, you're just gulping it down, you're completely circumventing all of the digestive enzymes that start to get secreted from your mouth. You're circumventing the biofeedback that the brain gets, especially if you're sipping the juice while you're working. Even if it's homemade juice, fresh juice, it's more or less all of the same. And your body is not even registering that this massive caloric load is hitting you right now. Eat your fruit. Unless you're missing some teeth, or you're in some sort of recovery, or you simply have no access. If I were to take this on travels, again, this was given to us, I would probably drink like that much of it. I dilute it with a lot of water and there's not been a single city, town, village that I have been to where I've not been able to find local fresh fruit. As soon as I land there, I buy some and I stock it up in my room because I do get hungry. I do want to snack. And that's what I do. Another one of my favorite snacks is actually peanuts. This is a half Korean, half Malayali recipe. I got to do this. I promise I'll send the recipe one of these days for that. Again, peanuts are nuts. They are high fat, high protein. But again, because I'm not on a calorie deficit and because I know I cannot stop with this, what I do is I take like a small plate or I take a tiny bowl and I give myself a portion of that. I eat it without any distractions. And you'll be surprised how much you can enjoy, savor, and quite possibly train yourself to not go back and get 3 or 4 more portions of it. All right, now I'm fairly a puddle of sweat. The air conditioning behind me is not working. My lunch is waiting for me. I hope you've enjoyed your meal today. Join me tomorrow. We're going to be talking about intermittent fasting, nutrient timing, some other kinds of diets, and also like the sheets that our body is made of. So the emotional eating that I was talking about. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye-bye.